She slid a white envelope across the counter, 2 crisp hundreds, and said, "Use this for a motel. Be out by Friday." I'm Mara Ellison, 62, mother, widow. And in that moment, no longer welcome in the studio behind my daughter's house. She had just announced the number, 33 million, like a trophy. Then she looked at me the way people look at a problem to be moved, not a person to be loved. "Don't make this harder," she added, as if I were the mess. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was hearing my own child decide I was disposable, just the wife, just an obstacle between her and a wire transfer. I closed my hand around the envelope, felt the paper bite, and understood. This wasn't a bad day. It was a line being crossed. 3 days later, she would be on my doorstep, eyes red, begging for something only I could give. But that night, I walked out with $200 and a secret that could stop 33 million cold. The wind chimes clinked against each other like a reminder that even air can be sharp. In the studio behind my daughter's house, the little ADU with a laminate counter and a sticky drawer that always catches, I folded Aiden's soccer jersey and slid it into the laundry basket. The sprinklers clicked on across the yard, hissing over the deckboard Sloane had stained last spring. On the fridge, next to the school calendar, a printout labeled escrow, tentative fund date curled at the edges. The plan was simple. A few months here to sort Tom's papers, keep dinners calm, get Aiden through math homework and bedtime without tears, stay small, be useful, leave the space better than I found it. That's what I told myself when grief pressed into the quiet like a heavy coat. Sloane walked in first, eyes bright the way they get when she's selling something. Confidence turned up just past empathy. 33, she said. No preamble. 3 million. The number hung between us like a chandelier no one asked for. Behind her, Camden set his sunglasses on the counter and started tapping his phone. He didn't look at me until he slid a white envelope forward. "Use this for a motel," he said, voice steady as a memo. "We need the studio empty by Friday." 2 crisp hundreds, as if my whole presence could be priced like a cleaning fee. Sloane stood there, arms folded, smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Don't make this harder," she added. "It's just a few days. We have contractors coming." The words landed in places I didn't know were still soft. I picked up the envelope because my hands needed something to do. I could hear Aiden in the house, humming the theme from a cartoon, unaware of the small earthquake happening 30 feet away. I looked at the stove clock, then reached up and set a timer anyway. 72 years. I don't know why. Maybe because time felt like the only thing I could control. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'll stay out of the way." I stacked my tea mug, wiped the ring it left on the counter, and nodded toward the fridge. "Your escrow date. Make sure they have everything they need. They don't like surprises." Sloane's jaw tightened, just a flicker. Camden lifted the envelope as if to remind me what cooperation looks like, then set it back down with a tap that felt like punctuation. I carried the envelope to the studio sink, counted my breaths, and packed what I could into 2 grocery bags, pajamas, charger. Tom's small wooden chest I hadn't opened yet. When I bent to zip the duffel, the wind chimes caught a stronger breeze and the sound went thin and metallic, like a hospital cart wheeled too fast. At the motel, the air smelled like bleach and old air conditioning. I placed the envelope in the drawer beside the bed and sat with the chest in my lap, thumb tracing the dent near the latch. My phone buzzed with a marketing email I almost swiped away before I saw the sender, Tom. From 2 years ago. One I'd missed while he was in and out of tests. "Mara, keep the lab notebooks safe. Buyer will need..." The line cut off on the preview, but it was enough to make my heart kick. I slid a fingernail under the latch and lifted the lid. The motel smelled like bleach and old air, a clean that never reached the corners. I slid the envelope in the drawer, pulled Tom's wooden chest onto the bed, and eased the latch until it clicked. The lab notebook lay on top, edges feathered, cover rubbed smooth from years of moves. On the first page, Tom had written, Ember Rank, San Mateo, CA, 2008. In the margin sat my initials, me, E. The witness mark I made the night he asked me to watch him write. The paper held a coffee crescent, a dusting of ash from the summer the sky turned bad fruit orange, and equations stacked like narrow city blocks. Beneath it was a USB in a labeled bag. I plugged it into the TV. Tom's thinner face filled the screen, eyes steady. If I was watching, he said, we hadn't fixed everything. Don't consent unless guardrails are in writing. No starving poor neighborhoods. Transparency on red flags. If they wouldn't put it in writing, walk. The money wasn't worth building a smarter fire that burned the poor first. When the screen went dark, I called Nora in San Jose. She answered like she'd been waiting. Because the invention phases were in California, the buyer would expect spousal consent to clear title, no e-signature, a wet signature before a public notary, and a clean chain of custody for the original notebook. Without that, escrow could be suspended. $33 million doesn't exist until the chain does. If I signed wrong, I could be pulled into someone else's forgery and spend the year under fluorescent lights. She didn't tell me to fight. She told me to document. From now on, write down every hand that touches the notebook, including mine. Photograph the pages I might need, back up the video twice, store copies separately. When there's a choice between a loud room and a signed form, choose the form, evidence and procedure, not arguments and kitchen drama. I repeated it until the words felt like rails I could walk without falling. I photographed the title page and 4 critical entries, emailed them to myself, and parked them in an all-caps folder so I wouldn't edit. I wrote the time I'd handled the notebook on the back of a receipt and slipped it into the chest. The AC rattled, a door slammed down the hall, but the noise felt far away. The only sound that mattered was a timer I couldn't see, counting down to a meeting I hadn't scheduled yet. If I stayed inside the rules, I might get through without breaking the contract, my bones, or the small bridge between me and my daughter. $33 million was a headline. The chain of title was the truth. I chose the truth and went to sleep with Tom's moral will flickering like the last light in a quiet house. I asked Sloane to meet at the 3rd Street coffee shop with the wobbly window table. She texted she was slammed. A minute later, Camden sent a DocuSign link with a party invite subject line. I didn't click. The preview showed a thread he hadn't meant to copy me on. Curiosity was safer. What opened looked like my name wearing a costume. The signature leaned wrong, as if the hand didn't know where my wrist pauses. The notary seal said Nevada. The address belonged to a co-working suite that rents mailboxes by the hour. The metadata drifted from the day Tom noted my presence on a key calculation. Either I'd been in 2 states at once, or someone had decided details were optional when the number had that many zeros. I set the phone down and let my pulse settle. Then I photographed everything with my thumb in frame so no one could say I'd scraped it online. I backed up Tom's video to 2 clouds and a drive that clicked shut, and shot the notebook pages again in better light. When I called Nora, she listened and drew the path in plain words. Keep the forgery out of the family chat and the kitchen. Prepare a formal demand to withdraw every falsified filing from escrow and notify buyer counsel. Line up an in-person notarization at the library so a notary and a librarian see ink hit paper. Draft the ethics rider in Tom's language, to be translated into contract clauses. Begin the chain of custody log now and don't skip a line. I wrote while she spoke, so the actions existed on paper before fear could erase them. When Camden pinged, "Time is money," I told him I would not sign electronically. Any consent would be executed in person with a public notary within the cure period, coordinated through counsel. I set the phone face down. The silence after a boundary isn't peace, it's a room resetting. Truth had tipped my way, but mishandled it can blow a house apart faster than a lie. If I accused them before the right eyes were in the room, Sloane would dig in, and Camden would find a new shortcut. And by bedtime, we'd be standing in wreckage with Aiden listening from the hallway. Timing would be the difference between a correction and a crater. I slid the notebook into a hard-sided tote and tucked the USB into a sunglasses case. I chose a non-blobbing pen and set it by my keys. Outside. Smoke from a distant burn drifted thin across a clean sky. Back at the ADU, the stove timer was counting down. I could almost hear it. Slow is smooth, Tom used to say when the world caught fire. Smooth is fast. I locked the door and walked toward the next right room. Back at the ADU, I was scooping the last of my things into a canvas tote when my phone vibrated hard enough to rattle the mug beside it. Notice of Defect. Cure period. 72 hours. I didn't open it right away. I crossed the room, turned the stove timer to 72 kilowatts, and pressed start so the seconds would have a place to go. The wind chimes answered with a thin, metallic clink, and the inbox began to populate with subject lines that all started with RE defect. Nora picked up on the second ring. I read the email aloud. Buyer counsel was questioning the chain of title. No valid spousal consent on file. Questions about the origin of the lab notebook. Good, she said. They're doing their job. From now on, no DocuSign. You sign in ink, in public, before a real notary, and we document custody of that notebook like it's evidence in a homicide. I brewed coffee strong enough to etch the spoon and printed a checklist I stuck to the mini fridge, then backed up Moral Will MP4 and rescanned the notebook, jotting the hash on a sticky note because proof behaves better when it wears a name tag. Camden materialized on the patio like a solution he'd been saving. Sign today and I'll wire $500,000 by dinner, he said, lowering his voice as if the law spooks easily. You'll be comfortable while the work gets done. I looked at the countdown ticking past 71-12-19 and felt my temper cool. That's not comfort, I said. That's buying a signature, and it's discoverable. His smile slid, the envelope vanished back into his jacket. When the door shut behind him, I opened my calendar and felt the ground steady. The day their notary said I'd signed in Nevada, I'd been at Aiden's elementary school logging vision screenings. The secretary emailed a scan of the volunteer sheet within 10 minutes. My name in blue ink at 2:14 The exact hour their stamp claimed me 2 states away. I photographed the page and forwarded it to Nora with a single word: alibi. The coffee left a brown ring on the edge of my checklist, a faint moon of pressure where the cup had sat while I chose a lane. If I blinked, I'd be swept into someone else's shortcut. If I held my line, I could decide the terms. The pickup lane curled around the block in a procession of minivans and lukewarm lattes. Aiden climbed in, cheeks flushed, cleats thumping the floorboard. You coming to my game? He asked, fastening his seatbelt with the seriousness of a pilot. I said I was, and he nodded like that fixed more than Saturday. Halfway home, he added, almost gently, Mom cried in the garage. She said the money won't come if you don't help. Back in the ADU, I set him up with fractions and an apple, angled the laptop so he wouldn't see my face on Zoom, and walked Nora through the draft demanding withdrawal of forged filings, citing the Notice of Defect. When we hung up, I called the escrow officer and left a voicemail as neutral as a courtroom transcript. I would execute a wet ink spousal consent within the cure period, in person, with a public notary present, and I would present the original notebook for on-site verification. A text from Sloane landed a moment later. Don't make this worse. all caps doing what they always do when words have run out of tone. While Aiden shaded in a crooked rectangle, a forwarded invoice pinged into the family email, Aspen Creek Senior Living, non-refundable deposit. My name typed cleanly above a move-in date next week. My hands went cool, then steady. I texted Sloane, "If you treat me like furniture to be relocated, I'll treat your contract like a contract, with conditions." The phone rang almost immediately. "How much do you want?" she asked. Brittle. "Not money," I said. "The right way." She exhaled, then let the part she'd been hiding fall. If the deal didn't close, the bank wouldn't release Camden's loan in Portland. The number wasn't just $33 million, it was a plug in a leaking dam. Aiden drifted over and stood close enough for me to feel his breath on my wrist. "I heard Mom tell Uncle Camden if you sign, the bank gives him money," he whispered, as if the house itself could eavesdrop. The last puzzle piece clicked. I opened a new email to buyer counsel and escrow, set the subject to proposed in-person notarization, day 3 of cure, and spelled it out. I would appear with the original notebook on the final day. Before then, Sloane and Camden would withdraw and destroy all forged consents and deliver a full inventory of documents previously submitted. I hit send, slid Aiden's drawing, Grandma lives here, into the lab notebook like a bookmark, and listened to the timer chew another minute off the life of everyone's favorite shortcut. Back at the ADU, I was scooping the last of my things into a bag when the subject line hit my phone like a gavel. Notice of Defect, cure period, 72 hours. I didn't open it right away. I set the stove timer to match and listened to the first second fall while the wind chimes tapped at the screen door. Buyer counsel said the chain of title wasn't clean, no valid spousal consent, questions about the provenance of the lab notebook. I called Nora and we locked the ground rules. No DocuSign, only a wet signature in public before a real notary. I printed a new checklist and slapped it on the mini fridge, backed up Tom's video, scanned the notebook pages, saved the file hash, and wrote down the exact minute my hands touched the original. Camden stepped onto the porch like a man looking for a shortcut and murmured that if I signed today, he'd wire $500,000 by afternoon. I told him buying a signature makes a fine exhibit when buyer counsel asks why I changed my mind. He left with his envelope and his jaw tight. The email had landed earlier than Sloane's confidence allowed for. Escrow was already under the microscope, and one misstep would freeze $33 million mid-wire. I pulled my volunteer calendar and requested the school's log from the day their notary supposedly stamped my name. The scan came back with my blue ink entry at 2:14 p. Ma'am. A neat alibi against a ghost seal in another state. A coffee ring spread on my checklist like a slow bruise. The timer kept shedding seconds. If I signed wrong, I'd be the story. If I held the line, I could set the terms. The pickup line crawled. And when Aiden climbed in, he asked about Saturday's game, then said his mother had cried in the garage because the money wouldn't come without me. I told him our job was to make the house quieter, not louder. Back at the studio, he bent over math while I opened Zoom with Nora to draft a letter demanding withdrawal of every falsified filing, citing the Notice of Defect. I called escrow next and left a neutral voicemail. I was ready to execute a wet signature before a public notary within the cure period and to present the original notebook for on-site verification. And I expected transparency in line with Tom's moral will. Sloane texted in caps not to make things worse. In the shared inbox, a receipt surfaced, a non-refundable deposit at Aspen Creek Senior Living, my name, a move-in date for next week. If I was furniture to be relocated, then her contract would be treated like a contract, with conditions. She called asking how much I wanted. I said it wasn't money, it was doing it right. Aiden whispered that he'd overheard her telling Camden a signature would unlock a bank draw on a Portland project. So I emailed buyer and escrow to fix an in-person notarization on day 3, contingent on full withdrawal and destruction of the forged consent and a complete inventory of prior submissions. Aiden handed me a crayon drawing. Grandma lives here, and I slipped it into the notebook. Between softness and steel, I chose the narrow path of procedure. By noon on day 2, the ADU felt like a command post. I opened the lab notebook to the VI Vulnerability Index you spread. A faint smudge of ash still clung to the edge like a fingerprint from 2008. The wind chimes ticked. The stove clock glowed 31:17:42. I called Nora and we wrote Tom's moral will into law. No algorithm that starves poor neighborhoods. When the model flashes red, the locals get to see exactly what it weighed, and every year an independent auditor puts hands on the VI module and tells the truth. While we worked, I rewatched Tom's video and found a 30-second tale I'd missed. His voice thin but firm. If Ember Rank ever chases accuracy past 92% at the cost of fair allocation, force an outside audit. I sent the clip to Nora. Suddenly, the audit clause wasn't a wish. It was evidence. Buyer counsel replied faster than I expected. They'd consider the writer if I proved an unbroken chain for the original notebook. I photographed my small witness marks beside Tom's dates and dug out a Polaroid from the garage. Day stamp baked into the white border. Me in an old sweatshirt. Tom hunched over the page I'd just opened. Then I carried the notebook to the bank and slipped it into a safe deposit box I could open in a crowded room with cameras. On the way home, Camden texted that he'd swing by to grab the original so Buyer could scan it. I told him no. Buyer scans in front of me at a 3-party meeting. That's what chain of custody looks like. Silence, then a muffled curse. The writer stopped being a feeling. It had a video, a timeline, and a lock. By late afternoon, the river threw light up against the cafe windows, and my timer had bled down to 26:95. Sloane arrived with eyes that said she hadn't slept. I slid the printed writer across the table and told her I would sign only if it rode with the purchase, and if every fake filing was pulled. She stared at the paper until words found her. Camden did it, she said. The notary. The hurry. He was upside down on a Portland project, and if this didn't close, the bank would cut him loose. Then she said what I knew was coming. She needed me. I showed her the email Camden had accidentally shared, the scan with a doctored date. This is why they'll suspend, I said. Not me. Her hands trembled. What do? We put it in writing. Camden signs an affidavit owning the scheme. They send withdrawal letters to escrow and buyer counsel. We set a 3-party session to scan and seal the original in view of everyone and, at the library, I sign with a real notary and a librarian watching the ink dry. Camden burst in hot and sweating, slid a pre-printed power of attorney toward me like a trap disguised as a shortcut. Sign here. And I don't have to show up. I didn't touch it. It's void, I said. Try to use it and you're building an elder abuse file for me. He froze. Sloane nodded toward the affidavit. His hand shook as he signed, a bead of sweat smearing the last stroke. I scanned the affidavit and the rider, emailed buyer counsel, ready for 3-party meeting, and checked the clock. 24:32:18. No more exits, only the narrow road ahead. Either we meet, we sign, and the rider holds, or 33 million disappears into litigation smoke. On the 3rd morning of the cure period, I signed the safe deposit ledger, lifted the lab notebook from its velvet slot, and walked it into the public library like a witness under oath. Buyer's portable scanner waited on a cart between the stacks. Nora's face blinked to life on a Zoom screen beside buyer counsel and the chief ethics officer. Sloane stood to my left, Camden to my right, both of them too quiet for this hour. We put everything on the table. I read the chain of custody aloud, dates, places, every hand since 2008, while Nora typed it into the record. The buyer's tech scanned the 4 crucial pages, Tom's block letters, my small M, E, in the margins, the Polaroid I'd brought with the day stamp baked into its white edge. Then I played Moral Will, MP4, including the 30 seconds I'd missed before, the part where Tom said if accuracy ever sprinted past 92% while fairness lagged, someone outside the house had to audit the engine. The chief ethics officer didn't blink. "We'll take the rider," she said, "as drafted. Non-discriminatory allocation, transparency on red flags, annual independent audit kept almost word for word, and she added a 90-day post-close ethics review to see how the thing behaved in the wild." I slid Camden's signed affidavit across the wood. Buyer counsel asked that it ride with the withdrawal and report of forged filings, and the escrow officer, patched in from a cubicle somewhere, confirmed the withdrawal letter had already landed. A librarian in a navy cardigan stepped forward with a notary stamp and a calm smile. Nora handed me the pen. My hand shook once and then steadied as the ink met paper. Wet signature, no shortcuts. The stamp thumped down like a door closing softly. Outside, the wind chime over the library entry gave a single bright note. On my phone, 11:08:27, the checklist in my head crossed its final box. Procedurally, the deal stood. QA still had to clear the runway, and per our record, I would hold the original notebook for 30 days to monitor how the ethics writer lived in practice. I'd barely zipped the tote when my phone vibrated again. Buyer QA. Subject line thin as wire. One more discrepancy found in a prior scan. Need to verify timestamps. By late afternoon, my phone chimed again. QA's subject line thin as wire, and 2 old scans filled the screen, their timestamps refusing to sit beside the date stamped into my Polaroid. An altered copy had slipped into the record somewhere before today. I carried the tote back to the library and set the original notebook on a scarred oak table that had seen 100 town meetings. Buyer's body cam blinked red to capture every move. We said each step out loud. I opened to the pages we'd flagged. The chief ethics officer read off the serial numbers of the scanners used in prior submissions. Buyer QA created a fresh scan in front of me and computed the hash while the camera watched the progress bar inch across the screen. We laid the Polaroid beside the paper. The frayed corner and that faint ash smear matched like a scar you could trace with your eyes closed. Tom's journal date aligned to the minute with the metadata on the new scan. Nothing theatrical, just the quiet weight of a thing that proves itself. QA traced the path of the bad file and stopped at a login, Camden's. The room went quiet except for the hum of the vents. Buyer counsel said we'd need a side letter before closing, Camden to accept professional discipline, a temporary suspension from his association, and a public notice to his partners acknowledging the falsified submission. He signed, jaw tight, pen skittering once at the bottom. A minute later, the escrow officer's email landed, clear to close. Funding confirmed for T+1 into Sloane's trust. The ethics writer recorded. I wrote a separate note to the chief ethics officer requesting the first independent audit at day 90 and a right to view the public summary as the writer requires. Her reply came back in a single line. Agreed. Before I left, I slid Aiden's crayon drawing, Grandma Lives Here, out of the notebook, laminated it at the front desk, and tucked it into a hard folder. It felt like sealing a family case file and opening a civic one. The legal firebreak held. What remained were the smaller fires, how to live under one roof with honest boundaries, and how to teach a child that trust, once bent, can be warmed back into shape if you don't rush the hands that hold it. Morning brought a clean subject line, wire confirmed, $33 million into Sloane's trust. The ethics writer attached and a D.90 post-close review already calendared. I didn't celebrate. I walked to the kitchen table, signed an actual lease for the ADU, $1 a month, ink on paper, so my place in this yard wasn't courtesy anymore. It was contract. We blocked out family therapy for Tuesdays at 6. Insurance will cover part of it. At dinner, I told Aiden the new house rule. We don't lie to get through a moment. If we mess up, we write what happened and how we'll fix it, our own kid-sized affidavits of truth. Near noon, the chief ethics texted from the field. In a drill outside Redmond, Ember Rank held resources steady for the low-income strip of mobile homes. Nobody got starved. The rider worked, she wrote. And I let that land where the ache had lived. Sloane handed me a note, block letters softening by the last line. I thought money was Dad approving me. Turns out I have to do things right to be trusted, by him and by you. I hugged her without promising to forget. Trust is fed daily, I said. We'll cook more of it. By late light, I watered the planters along the studio. The wind chimes sang, not warning this time, just cool air off the pines. Beyond the fence, the ponderosa darkened to a good green. I whispered into the space Tom used to fill. I didn't beat anyone. I kept my promise to you and to myself. The chain of title is clean. The chain of trust has begun to mend, from revenge to rebuild.